This is the first part of the guide to the Soul War quest. It's very important to follow a specific order for this quest, which is how I will break down the parts for the series. For this first one, let's break down the Claustrophobic Inferno and Goshnar's Malice. For the access to this boss, you need to survive inside 3 trials, where on each of them, waves of monsters will come and the goal is to survive for 2 minutes. After that, you will be teleported to the next area and will be able to go to the next floors, and the main damage from the monsters is death, followed by fire and physical. The use of stone skin amulets is recommended if you start to get overrun. For the first trial, which is located to the south of the first floor, you want to go towards the west side. This one will be the easiest because most of the monsters spawn in the middle, and on this side there won't be that many, but depending on your killing speed, you might struggle more. Because of that, it's important for the mages to wave, but at the same time, avoid going too wide to avoid luring more monsters. Once the 2 minutes are over, the monsters will disappear and you just need to wait a few seconds to get teleported. Then head south towards the stairs to the second floor. I recommend to do 2 pulls on this floor to clear the monsters on the way to the second trial, because even though it's possible to run straight into it, you will get hit too much and it's more important to be fully prepared for the trial than to save some seconds. Once everyone is fully healed, then go inside the trial and towards the northwest. Additionally, it's useful to place an energy bomb when you go in, as that will indicate the timer of the trial. Once the energy bomb disappears, it means there is only a few seconds left of the trial. The reason for being on this side is that the druids can hide behind 3 tree walls and be somewhat safer. However, ideally, you want to be outside first and use waves to clear the first turns, since it is still easier to manage, and then go inside the tree walls when needed. But also keep in mind that Brachiodemons break the walls if they get too close to it, and also one Brachio always spawns south of them. For that, it's important to have the Paladin to be nearby when it spawns to get the aggro and move it away from the walls, and the Sorcerer tries to stay outside as much as he can, but be aware that the special mechanic of this spawn is that the Infernal Demons target the lowest HP player, often going for the Druids, but in this case, if they are behind the walls, the next target will be the Sorcerer. This will be annoying, and the only way to deal with them is to have the knight constantly rest them. Normally, I prefer to stand a few more squares to the east so that the paladin and sorcerer can run around me if needed, but when doing that, more monsters will come, so the lower level you are, the harder that will be. And always remember that the most important thing when doing these trials is to continue to attack at all times, otherwise you will get overrun by the monsters. Once you are done, then go north to take the stairs, and then everyone can run straight south into the third trial. For this one, you want to be on the east side. Once again, there will be a spot for 3 walls where 3 people can be safe, but I still recommend the sorcerer to be outside and continue to wave, and only go behind the 3 walls to drop the aggro for infernal demons if necessary. And just like the last trial, remember to use an energy bomb to keep track of the timer. This trial is easier than the previous, so if you succeeded to get here, then you should be just fine. Once it's over and you get teleported, make sure to go southeast into this smoke, because the teleport in this room takes you back to the spawn, so be careful with that. For this boss and the quest in general, I recommend over level 700, especially the knight, since he will be the one with the higher chances of getting headshot. And as the knight, for this boss you will need between 300 to 600 stone skin amulets. Ideally, you want to have as much physical protection you can get and 1 or 2 death imbuements. That's the equipment you will use on all bosses. My rings are recommended to have for emergencies, but I advise against using one the entire time, because personally that just gives me more things to keep track of and is harder for me. I prefer my focus to be mainly on the amulets and resting the monsters, followed by potions, and lastly doing damage when possible. As for the shooters, they get hit less often, so it's much easier to hold on to my rings and stone skin amulets since they don't get consumed right away, but the paladin will use a bit more in general since he will have to off tank sometimes, and the reason for the stone skin amulets in general is because the main damage from the grims is physical and it can crit, so whenever somebody is tanking a grim, you want to have a stone skin amulet to decrease the damage. For this boss in particular, the stone skins in the shooters are mostly for the extra safety, and most of the charges will be used on tanking the damage reflection from the boss, but the knight will have 5 creatures on him most of the times, and the amulets will be used almost instantly. So with that aside, let's talk about the mechanics for this boss. The first one, and the main priority is the soul cage. About every 30 to 40 seconds or so, the cage will spawn on the north side of the room. When this happens, all the shooters must start attacking it with spells and physical attacks, as these do the least damage, so avoid using those. In the case of mages, doing their full wave rotation with a Grand Figo or Grand Flam in between. But also, if you can, some people find it useful to also summon fire elementals, since that doesn't intervene with your attack cooldowns, and it adds a bit more of damage. But please make sure that you are not missing actual turns of attacks for summoning, because then it's not worth doing. As for the paladins, they target the cage and can mass sand and Oxoricon or sand the cage. And always keep your UEs as backup in case you feel like you won't kill the cage on time, which lasts for less than 15 seconds in total, so around 7 attack turns. If you fail to kill the cage in time, then you most likely have failed the boss, and I recommend to leave or continue for a bit longer if it is your first time doing it, so that you get more familiar with the mechanics and playstyle for these bosses. The reason for being so drastic about this is that if the cage doesn't die on time, then the boss will absorb it and become stronger in damage and resistance. And for most teams, it becomes too hard to do at that point, and that's why this mechanic is the main priority. You can tell if you fail a cage by seeing this message in the middle of the room. The second mechanic of this fight is that around every 40 seconds, a death UE will hit the room. This UE does around 8k damage, and the only way to avoid it fully is to stand on the white tiles that appear randomly on the room before the UE hits, which is how you can tell when the UE is coming, or also by seeing this message in the middle of the room. But also, by having the Stone Skin Amulet, most of the damage will be reduced. However, as the knight, since you are already tanking monsters and getting your amulet broken every second, this mechanic is the most difficult, as it can easily kill you if you get hit without the amulet equipped at the exact time. So for that, I recommend to go for the white tiles every time. But before moving, make sure to rest the monsters so their aggro remains on you, and depending on the level, this is where I will go for Utamo Tempo and my ring. In case the white tiles are too far, you should still move a few squares, since that will help with the attack turns you tank, and that way you will likely have the stone skin for the UE. However, just like keeping yourself alive is important, so it is to keep the monsters on you, especially the greens and the boss, and more so during the times when the cage is alive, since if the boss gets near the cage, it can heal the boss, and that's why knights don't tank the boss near the cage. And overall, you should be using the rest every other turn, since these monsters like to retarget off them, but at the same time, reposition yourself so that the boss does not hit you with his waves. Another thing that I like to do for this boss as the knight is to use a death or earth weapon. This will do good damage to the boss and the flimsies, but not to the grims. The reason for this is that I like to kill the flimsies, as that gives a few seconds of one less creature hitting you, making it slightly easier for the knight. However, this comes at the expense of the paladin most of the times, since one of the flimsies respawns near the cage. When this happens, the paladin must hold on to it and wait until the cage respawns and dies before bringing it to the knight, since like I said before, the main priority is to always attack and kill the cage on time, and you don't want it to respawn while moving around the room to bring a monster to the knight, especially because the damage of the flimsy is just around the 1k, so it shouldn't kill any of the shooters for taking it a few seconds. This is my preferred way of doing it. But there is one other strategy that some people like to use, which is to have the knight hold all the 5 creatures by the wall, making sure to have the boss and at least one of the flimsies on the diagonal spots to not get hit by their waves and beams. And when in this position, the knight goes in full tank mode of holding Otamo, mind rings, and stone skins the entire time. However, I highly recommend to not do this, as most people that go for that strategy are likely using programs to re-equip their stone skin amulets instantly, and this leaves less chances of dying to the UE, which is not the case for people doing manually. And also by doing this, the EK is also not providing much or any damage to the boss, so that makes this fight longer and hence more room for mistakes, which is why after trying it once and dying to it, I decided to avoid doing it that way. However, even doing it the way I recommend comes with risk, like losing aggro of the monsters when moving, letting the boss hit mages with his waves sometimes, and putting the paladin or mage at risk when bringing the flimsy back to the knight. But despite that, I still prefer doing it like that. And that is all you need to know for this boss. For the next part of the series and the next boss you should do when doing the quest, I will cover the Mirror Nightmare and Goshnar's Grid. Please consider subscribing if you found the video helpful. Thank you for watching, and a special thanks to the supporters of the channel, Tuna Hero, Elber, and Torto Slasher.